Sue, and thank you very much everybody for taking time to join this webinar this afternoon. I'll introduce you to everybody as we go through the session, but for the more tuned in individuals, you'll recognise that we actually lost a presenter earlier. Unfortunately, the amazing James Keenan is unable to join us today, but sends his apologies. But I'm delighted to say that you still have an amazing panel with Barry and with Trevor, and we can probably answer most of the questions regarding ISO certifications. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we carry on. I'm sure many of you know this, many of you will be RRSM members, but a little bit of information there about the RRSM. I've been a member and a fellow of the RRSM for probably about 8 years now. Really brilliant organisation that endeavours to bring together the great and the good in the risk management world and to ensure that we are working as an effective and cohesive community. In terms of the webinar today, we'll do a few introductions in a moment, and we'll just then have a quick look at who and what is ISO. There is a significant volume of ISO information around the world, and we'll just have a quick look about what the benefits and values of ISO are. We'll have a quick look at why you should adopt an ISO certification, and then I'm going to hand over to the panel and get their views on the value of ISO certifications, certainly in the world of risk management, and importantly, where the worlds of risk management, ISO and insurance collide. Now, I'm really, really pleased to have some amazing panel members with me today. Barry, I'm going to hand over to you. Do you want to just do a quick introduction of who you are and what your background is?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Barry Graham. My background is a blend of security consultancy, ISO auditing. So I've been the auditor as well as the implementer, and a former veteran member of the military. So all of those things heavy on risk management, and I hope to be able to sort of help you with any questions you have in that respect today. Thank you.
And I think, Barry, that's one of the key aspects you bring to this, isn't it? Is having been both sides of the ISO side in terms of you've worked on projects and implemented ISO management systems, but you're also a very experienced and very qualified auditor with NQA. So we've got lots of experience there as well.
Thank you.
Trevor, can I introduce you or ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm also ex-military. I did the Navy for 3 years when I was younger, but I've been in insurance for 31 years. That's why I'm so grey. And yeah, I get involved in risk, looking at risks and where ISO is used or not used, and how insurers interpret it.
And I think one of the question sets we're going to have with you, Trevor, when we get further through the call is what risks are insurers seeing at the moment? What things are keeping insurers awake? What's concerning them? What trends are you seeing? And what concerns do you have in the marketplace? And then finally, myself, as Sue very kindly introduced me, I'm the Managing Director at Risk Evolves. We're a management consultancy company based here in the UK, covering everything from health and safety through to data privacy and information security risk. And we help a number of organisations with the implementation and adoption of ISO standards. So we work quite closely as well with Trevor, who coincidentally provides our insurance for us. But we're very keen to learn and understand what's happening in the insurance world and feeding that back into our horizon scanning activities. So for those who are not aware of ISO, ISO is a global organisation. It represents something in the region of 187 different countries, and they work, as it says there, to develop internationally agreed specifications, i.e. what is the best way of doing this. There are currently in the region of, believe it or not, almost 25,000 ISO standards, 24,000 and a few others as well. And there are a number that many of us as risk managers will recognise. So ISO 9001 being the quality management, 45 being health and safety, and many, many others. And I'll dip into some of those in a little bit when we look at some of the statistics that are coming out of ISO at the moment. They manage that through just over 800 technical committees, and if you ever have the opportunity to get involved in either an ISO standard or perhaps a local country standard, so in the UK it would be a British standard, I would encourage you to do that. I've worked on a British Standard Committee, and it's certainly something which enables you to see risk from a different perspective and to influence how risk can be managed in a way that's appropriate for any type of organisation, regardless of size, regardless of sector, and regardless of geographic location. Every standard will go through a review. Typically 3 to 5 years is the typical life cycle for a standard. So for those of you that are familiar with ISO 27001, for example, the Information Security Management Standard, that's just very recently been through a review. That went through a review and significantly updated in 2022. If we look at the risk management standard itself, ISO 31000, that was reviewed in 2018, and I understand they're just beginning the process now to look at whether or not it needs to be reviewed again. And the final point there says it interlocks with national organisations. So ISO do not work in isolation. They represent, as I said, 167 countries. And if you have the opportunity to get involved either at a local, national level or on an international level, really encourage you to do that. Barry, I'm just going to bring you in on the ISOs. Is there anything that you want to add there from your perspective, having been, I feel like, on the other side as an auditor?
I think just the key point with relevance to the topic we're addressing today is the management of risk. So there are a whole host of different compliance frameworks depending upon the topic. There's some topic specific, such as information security, and there's some which are more general, 31000. But ISO contains what I perceive to be the best practice based on evidence of looking at the whole spectrum of compliance frameworks which are at your disposal. So ISO offers the best solution.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. It's kind of the gold standard, isn't it? The overarching standard of best practice. So some numbers. We did a very, very similar webinar to this just over 12 months ago in January 2022, and we put this slide up then of the numbers of standards that were available and were widespread across the globe. 12 months later, just over 12 months later, the numbers continue to increase. And what you can see there is that the world's most popular standard is ISO 9001, the quality management standard. But you can also see as well that there are other significant standards which again have significant footprint in a number of organisations. So 14001 environmental, 45001 health and safety, 27001 information security, 22,000, oh Barry, keep me honest, this one is service management, I think, isn't it?
Correct, yeah.
13485 is medical devices, and the rest I'll let you look up at your leisure. But what's really clear is that, you know, there's over 1 million organisations that have got ISO 9001, and the numbers on the side also tell a key story as well, and a key message that the number of standards that are available and are being implemented within organisations continues to have a year-on-year increase. So as it says there, 27001, the Information Security Management Standard, has seen a 19% increase compared to where it was in 2021. It's one of the fastest growing standards. So if your organisation hasn't got a standard, this could be a really good opportunity to just step back and say, perhaps we should be thinking about adopting and implementing a standard. Any comments there, Barry, from your perspective? I know that you work with a number of these different standards.
Yeah, no, the key thing to note is that all of them have a set of overlapping requirements, which is common regardless of the topic. So the top three there, you know, for quality, health, safety, environmental, and InfoSec, you know, they're in fourth. They all have a same framework of requirements. So adopting one standard and practicing that and getting used to that and really implementing it into the place where you work could lead to others. So they all have topic specific requirements, but fundamentally the process is similar regardless of which one you choose to adopt.
That's a good point. So risk evolves. Just from our perspective, we have three standards. We've got ISO 9001, we've got ISO 27001, and I'm disappointed to see that 27701 isn't on that list. 27701 is the data privacy standard, and you're absolutely right. There's a very common element, and the three standards all plug together extremely well. So where does standards and risk come in? Well, risk management and specifically the 31000 standard, ISO 31000, is very much part of clause 6 in many of the ISO standards, and that follows the framework of risk management, which is described in much more detail in 31000, and certainly in more detail than we've got time to go into here. There's a useful link there, and I'm unashamedly going to point to NQA. What they've done is they've produced a list of all the main standards, so 9, 14, 45, etc. And they've just described how the standards lock together with each of the clauses. They've also described as well how that clause 6, the risk management aspect, interlocks extremely well. I would encourage you to have a quick look at that comparison tool. When it comes to risk management techniques, and I've taken this directly from the Managing Risk course, which is delivered by RRSM, and actually Barry will be delivering this on behalf of RRSM next month. We talk about different tools and techniques to manage risk, but one of the aspects we'll talk about, and which is really pertinent to this call, is that of transferring. So you may want to transfer some of your risk, and you may want to transfer some of your risk to an insurance provider. Now, I'm going to ask Trevor to come in, because I know, Trevor, you're really concerned about people still doing stuff to manage the risk and not just trying to abdicate it completely to your insurance partner. But the key is you remain accountable for the risk, even if you transfer it, and there will still be some residual risk that you need to consider, and that's typically where insurance comes in.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, risk management's key. I think it helps anybody from an insurance perspective that they have well-managed risks. A good sign of a well-managed risk is having the right ISO standards in place. You know, particularly we come across things like the 9001 and the 14001. It seem to be regular things that we come across. And now with cyber insurance, we'll come across the ISO 27001 standards as well. And insurers see it as a massive positive. It's a plus point. I don't think that commercially you'll get a 10% discount for having a standard, but certainly when insurers underwrite, they have a commercial discount available, which we don't see. It's behind the scenes, and they're discounting a risk against those different levels or positive risk management tools. And ISOs are definitely one of those that they're looking for. And if you've got it, it gives you a bit of a tick, and then it's going to give you more favourable terms.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Trevor. Which kind of comes onto my benefits in terms of why would you have an ISO standard? What's the value of it? Certainly when we work with organisations, we're looking to see that it absolutely supports good governance, good corporate governance, and clearly good risk and compliance management. If you want an ISO just to have a certificate on the wall, then that's a very expensive piece of paper to have on the wall. What we would absolutely recommend is that your ISO system should drive a change in behaviour that ensures that you have got the governance in your organisation to understand how risk is managed within your business effectively and consistently. It should also give your stakeholders confidence that you know what you're doing. And stakeholders, of course, covers many different descriptions. It's not just the employees, it's not just your shareholders, it's everybody that's got an interest in your organisation. And what it's saying to you externally is that you are benefiting from independent external audit. Somebody else has come in and had a look at your organisation and assessed the governance and the risk management that's going on within your business and said, this is a very good standard. It's best practice based on an ISO standard. So you're sending a message of certainly confidence and reassurance out to your stakeholders. It should mean that you have reliable delivery of products and services. What do we mean by that? So certainly if you're looking at manufacturing, some of the standards there, what it's saying is you should have a consistent process that ensures you have the good, reliable quality of whether it be goods, whether it be services, whether it be professional services as we do. And most importantly, it demonstrates that commitment to continual improvement. If things go wrong, you have the mechanisms in place to then take that right the way back through the process to understand the lessons learned and to make sure that those improvements go into whatever processes that you use. We're seeing the requirement for ISOs, I think, increase, and Barry, I know you've seen this as well, increased requirement to get into certain supply chains. Certainly if you are in, you're wanting to get into UK government at the moment, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have certain credentials, and having ISO standards is a really, really great door opener to that.
It is. It is, but it's also a lot of other things. Regardless of what sector you work in, you're probably going to be subject to things like questionnaires from your vendors, from your stakeholders, from your supply base itself. You're going to be subject to, well, what is your stance on, what is your policies around, and then whatever the topic is. Now, for information security, and as Trevor said, the sort of the cyber environment, that's increasingly prevalent, and now a barrier to enter in a supply chain is demonstration of knowledge of your own information security practices, and having an ISO system in place gives you the confidence that you can absolutely answer that in every case. So it used to be a real shiny badge, to use your phrase, in terms of showing off how well you do things. Now it's almost a necessity to make sure that your business is going to be viable and you can enter supply chain. So really worth considering.
Absolutely. And I think the next point on cost reductions, the ISO implementation of ISO standards, it isn't for the faint-hearted, is it, Barry?
No.
They do require a level of investment.
The hard work comes once you've got the badge, you know, because you have to keep the system going.
You have to keep it going, and
Yeah.
you have to demonstrate that continual improvement. You can't just sit back and go, that was amazing, I don't need to do anything anymore, because you absolutely do need to keep the system up and running. I think what's then missed is the hidden cost reductions, if you like, the cost avoidance that you might have. You might be avoiding cost because you're no longer having to write complex responses to tender documents because you've got your ISO. It could be that you're identifying risks before they become issues, and therefore you're not having complex corrective actions to put in place. So certainly we see benefits of implementing ISOs as part of cost reduction, which can offset some of the cost of implementing them. And I've got a bit of a catch-all there, Barry. Any other benefits that you see? And I'm going to ask Trevor as well the same when it comes to ISO certifications. Are there any other benefits you see that perhaps we haven't captured here?
Yeah, it's standardization. So every component part becomes replaceable. Every business has a risk around expertise, regardless of who's listening in. Everybody works in a business where there is a known entity within that business who's been around for as long as the furniture, and you go to them to answer questions. And what happens when that person leaves? It's on everybody's mind. Every risk manager's got the risk of loss of expertise. ISO takes some of the sting out of that, if not most of it, because it's a process-driven thing. It makes you go around in circles, making sure you're doing things the best way you can, and it's repeatable, and therefore you don't need expertise. The days of the gifted amateur, so to speak, are heading into the rearview mirror, and ISO makes sure that every single person is replaceable in that respect, because you have a common approach to the way you do things. So it helps you identify, yes, but also helps you alleviate the risks and forces accountability where it belongs.
Definitely. Trevor, any other thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it drives that community, doesn't it, within a business. So it's not just down to one person achieving a certain level. It's about a number of different people achieving a certain standard and being part of that. And I think that drives community within the business, and that's got to be a positive.
Absolutely. So our last slide before we open up to Q&A is there's just some additional information there on key links to follow. This is a little bit UK centric. Barry, where would you go for information on a non-UK equivalent of, say, UCAS? Is that
okay?
IAF?
IAF, so the International Accreditation Forum. I mean, the link's not there, but it's quite easy to obviously do a search engine and look through. So the International Accreditation Forum is the global body which is responsible for overseeing national accreditation bodies, which in turn oversees the certification bodies, which gives you your certificate. So there is a hierarchy there for the ISO world. So IAF, regardless of where you're listening in from, it will apply to you.
And Barry, I'm going to bring you back to that point as well. What's the difference between accreditation and certification, and what's the risk of having a non-accredited certification body? There's lots of, I know it's complicated, isn't it? But if you can just summarise.
Okay, so yeah, very quickly. Well, in the UK, there's a peculiarity we've noted when we've been auditing, and that there are some businesses and institutions which are not accredited as part of the IAF scheme. So the IAF scheme ensures a common approach. So regardless of the accreditation body in whatever country it exists, they must follow the rules which are set down by the IAF, which makes sure everything's consistent. So your certificate in Ghana means the same as in India, means the same as in Australia, it means the same as in the UK, so on and so forth. Okay, so there are some institutions out there which don't follow those rules and claim to just follow the process of conducting an ISO audit and issue you a certificate for a 10-year period, for example, for way less money than you can get from an official accredited body. Okay, and in the UK, that's a real problem, because those certificates don't mean anything. They won't open the doors. They won't let you into the supply chains because you're not audited. You're not subject to the same scrutiny as you are in the IAF scheme. So the difference is, to go back to your first question, an accreditation body is a national body which is responsible for overseeing all institutions and entities which provide certificates to you. So certification bodies in the UK, such as NQA, for example. Accreditation bodies follow IAF rules, the IAF being the sort of global institution. So really important to do a check to make sure that if you are scrutinizing a supplier's or a vendor's certificate, that ISO standard aligns to that practice I've just described with the IAF and national accreditation bodies.
Absolutely. So UCAS audit the auditors, don't they? Is another way of looking at it. So UCAS will go out and make sure that all the certification bodies in the UK are performing at the same level. So they'll go and audit auditors, which is to ensure that consistency across all the certifications that you see. Just call out there one future event, as I've just mentioned, is the Managing Risk, the Essentials course, which Barry will be leading. And if you've got any questions on that, we're happy to take them through. So without further ado, I'm just going to open up the panel. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Remember how to do that. There we go. Right, Trevor, what are you seeing? $1 million question. What are you seeing at the moment in terms of trends from an insurance perspective? What should we all be aware of that might be happening to other companies, and what can we do to stop it happening to ourselves?
So I work in the technology space mainly, and so a lot of my work at the moment is around cyber. We're seeing several trends from insurers at the moment. One is around risk management. It's about business continuity. It's about making sure you've got the right standards in place, the right things, the right management tools are there, and it's all sort of preventative as opposed to being reactive. So it's all about stopping it happening rather than waiting for it to happen and then clearing it up afterwards. And I think for those people who have got that in mind, there is more positivity, there's more market. And bearing in mind, we're in what we call a hard insurance market. So it means that at the moment, there isn't so much competition. So underwriters, for instance, are being they're scrutinizing more. So they're looking for the positives, whereas before they might not have been in a competitive market where it was soft, where they'd have more allowance, if you know what I mean. So the more you have, the better you manage, the more ISOs you have, the more compliance procedures you have in place, the better, as far as I'm concerned from an insurance perspective.
Okay, fantastic. And can I just pick up on the conversation that I started around residual risk? So insurance is there for residual risk management, isn't it? It's not to manage the whole risk.
I always refer to insurance as the safety net. So it acts as a safety net. It's there to pick up the pieces after something has happened, you know. So you only insure what you can't afford to pay for yourself, you know. And when you break down an insurance policy, when you're looking at deductibles, excesses, liability limits, all of these sort of things, you have to look at it with that, well, I can't afford that myself. You know, you might take a £500 excess on a car policy because you know you've got £500 stuffed away in the bank, so you can pay the first £500. You have to have that same mentality when it comes to any insurance policy. And when it's for a business, you might have deep pockets, you might not. You know, it just depends where you are in the stage of your business. But that's what it's about, and therefore it's about picking up the pieces. The other thing that insurance gives you is at that time of need, it has the expertise around it. So if you, for instance, under a cyber situation need forensic help, it has forensic help. If you need legal help, it has legal help. It, you know, it has these differing areas within the insurance policy which will help you at the time of your need. But it's all down to nobody wants that to happen. So you want to put all the preventative measures in place to stop it happening, because no matter what insurance policy you have, it will cause inconvenience. you know, and I can guarantee that, you know, whilst insurers will pay out on claims, you'll never feel as if you're 100% compensated for your loss, because there's a loss of time and inconvenience and all this sort of stuff that all has a cost involved in it. But, you know, you can't show that cost, if you know what I mean.
And reputation as well. Just to pick
Yeah.
up on your point, one of the things, you know, and I can say this from auditing multiple standards and implementing it, is people don't account for reputation. They look at numbers involved. If we are breached, here is the numbers involved. You know, we're going to lose this, we're going to owe that. And yeah, insurance can be part of the solution, but post-incident on the recovery phase, you've got to now consider your reputation. And I'll pose this, not question as such, but everybody listening, is if you have this thought, if you look at international news, especially where a company had been through the mill and they'd had a huge data breach, for example, or a huge incident in the cyber environment, in the period afterwards, they never bounce back to the point they were before. It takes a long time because of the reputational effect, and people overlook that in risk registers. So yeah, I absolutely agree with all of the points you made there. But one thing to really consider, regardless of what sector or country you live in, is how is your reputation going to recover? The insurance will take care of the numbers in some respect, but your reputation is one of those things that once you've lost it, it's really hard to regain. So
Brilliant. And Barry, Trevor mentioned a really good point as well about one of the things that ISOs indicate, and it may not have been obvious as we started going through this, is the role of leadership. So I know there's been some big changes in how some of the standards are structured, such that it's no longer just a man in the warehouse or a woman in the warehouse managing quality system, for example. This is at a leadership level. So could you just expand on what you see, both from an implementation perspective and also the importance of leadership when you come to do audits for ISO?
yeah, absolutely. So as part of the ISO implementation scheme, and certainly before you get your certificate, you have to demonstrate within an organization that the leadership has been the driving force behind it all, and the risk management element of that ISO implementation involves risk ownership, and we certainly need to see accountability, if not direct ownership of risk at executive level. And now, in my experience in general, is that many executive levels are concerned with running the business, and for example, security and ISO and those badges that the compliance team get on with are not my business. They are your business, because if it goes wrong, then we just talk about reputation torpedoes. It's the executives who pick up the slack, who do the jail time, who so on and so forth. So it is so important that it's not just a case of financing. The leadership have to be involved and be the driving force behind the implementation and developing the culture necessary for a safe health and safety environment, for example, or to make sure that environmental and social governance or information security are addressed, and the culture changes across the organization. Change is difficult, really difficult, and it can't be achieved without buy-in from the very top, because they've got to make sure that people toe the line, so to speak. So yeah, in terms of the question of leadership is one of the utmost. I'm not going to prioritize what's more important than the other during an implementation, but leadership is absolutely at the top of the agenda when it comes to making it happen.
And following on from that, then, how do we demonstrate that we're managing risk effectively as part of an ISO standard?
Cyclical. It's not a one and done thing. It is not a one and done thing. So at any given point in time, I dare say, as a consultant, you can go into any organization and say, okay, as of today, here is a risk profile for this organization. Okay, that is not going to that's going to be subject to changes in the operational environment. So the way the world works, the issues around Ukraine and Russia, for example, were on nobody's risk register in 2021. They're absolutely on a lot of people's risk registers now. So legislation in your particular country or your particular region, again, that changes. In the UK, we've been subject to a lot of data privacy regulation and legislative changes in the last 5 years, with more to follow. So the rules you've established to fix the risks you've identified are not a static thing. So to be effective and to demonstrate effectiveness, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're revisiting the process to make sure that it's current and up to date. And again, I'll use that word, leadership accountability is evident.
And Trevor, pretty much the same question to you. When you're looking from an insurance perspective, what are you looking to see that risk is being managed effectively within an organisation, rather than somebody just filling in an application form for ticking boxes on an insurance questionnaire?
We want to see that it's structured, it's done in a way that it comes from the top down and that everybody's got a part of it. So, you know, you look at very much the case with ISO 27001, you're looking for that to be embedded, not at just ground level, but at board level as well, if that's where the company's gone, because everybody could be the root cause of a loss. And if you've got that group effect that everybody joined in, everybody knows what's happening, it's communicated throughout the business and it's driven throughout the business by all the relative different peers, then that's a plus point that all insurers want to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll just pause there. We've got the questions box if anybody would like to ask questions. Sue, have we got any questions coming through at the moment, or should we just carry on? What's your any questions?
We've got a couple of questions already.
Okay.
So some questions about ISO certification itself. Is it onerous to get, and what are the steps in doing so?
Barry, I'm going to hand that over to you, and I think it's got our million. It's our standard statement, isn't it? It depends on where you're starting from.
yeah, everybody's going to have a different starting point. So, for example, some complete startups in terms of where they're at along their journey. So, when they start up, they're quite shocked by the hoops you have to jump through to enter a supply chain. So they won't have anything in place. They won't have practiced a way of doing, for example, information security or ensuring customer satisfaction in a quality sense. It's new to them, so they're going to have nothing. So they need to do the whole thing from scratch. So more mature organizations which have been around for a few years, they've established some ways of working which lend themselves to ISO certification, but not others. They'll need to undertake what's called the gap analysis. So they'll need to figure out where they need to be to achieve certification, what they have in place already, and everything that they don't have, which they do need. That's the work they've got to do. So it depends, depending upon which type of organization you are and where you are on your journey, how mature you are and how mature your practices are. But more importantly, what standard are you going for? So if you don't understand things like information security, service desk management, you know, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, and that's the standard you're going for, then you need to do a bit of digging to learn about what good is and what good looks like. So it depends. It's really difficult to nail that down to a very specific answer. However, what I would say, there are plenty of good consultancies out there which can help you for a small fee, of course, to understand where you are and what you need to do to get there. And then sometimes they'll even take that all work away from you, so they'll do it for you. So my advice is, if you don't know, seek help. It's better to do that, and it's less expensive to do that in the near term than it is longer term to try and do it yourself and ultimately not achieve what you want.
And I think just one other thing on that as well is that this is scalable for any organisation size, isn't it, Barry? So
Yeah,
Risk Evolves, our smallest customer is a one-person organisation who has ISO 27001. He's providing a technology platform for a particular sector, and he knows he needs ISO 27001. So the fact that it was a one-person organisation is fine, isn't it? The standards are completely scalable, not to exclude anybody or any sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So it applies everywhere. So you're quite right. The biggest audit I do is a multinational with tens of thousands of personnel across the globe, and the smallest one, as you say, is our dear friend who is a one-person virtual company. And ISO and all of the standards in that respect apply to each company of that size and everything in between.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. You've actually answered the next two questions as well, so that's fantastic. Thank you.
Sorry, because I talk too much. Sorry, Sue.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Can we talk about supply chain? Because I know that we all believe that supply chain is a little bit of a risk to businesses. Trevor, what are you seeing from a supply chain perspective when you're talking to your clients about insurance?
I don't think people appreciate how debilitating a loss by somebody in your supply chain can affect you. And what I mean by that is that could be the supplier of raw materials to the supplier of technology to, you know, a support service like bookkeeping or wage roll administration or something like that. All of them have an effect in how your business runs. And if you've got no idea what you would do if that person wasn't there, and you've used John down the road for 20 years, you know, and you don't know who his competitor is, then when his factory burns down and you've got no raw materials coming in for you to manufacture your product, it's going to leave you high and dry. So it's about recognizing the importance, and also making sure that they do all the right things as well, because you don't want John down the road to have a loss and that cause you the inconvenience anyway. So it's all about, I suppose, due diligence on your supply chain, making sure they meet certain levels and standards and things like that, and they come up to scratch, and that they've got the backing behind them. So, you know, you can go out and buy yourself a cyber policy to protect you, but if your supply chain is not buying a cyber policy, then you can still be affected by a loss at their premises. And, you know, that applies to fire, that applies to many other risks, just in different ways.
So Barry, how does ISO help with that supplier chain management problem?
It forces due diligence. Again, takes away. So a common thing we encounter for new ISO customers or people who are beginning on that journey is, oh, I know that chap, or I've worked with that chap for X number of years, X period. Good, fantastic. What if he's unsafe? What if his practices are fundamentally unsafe? His administration is not in order. He doesn't follow best practice when it comes to adherence to law and regulation. But I know him. I go to the golf club with him or whatever. That's not good enough. So ISO takes that question away, and it forces you, in some respects, to pay due diligence to whoever you consider to be a supplier. You identify them as a stakeholder to your business and your system, and it forces you to do due diligence. So in an information security sense, for example, you identify that supply chain risk is a thing, and the way you control it is by asking questions, some searching questions of your supply base. You know, what are your policies for information security? How do you handle data? Are you aware of what regulation and legislation you're bound by? And based on those answers, you can be selective about who your suppliers are. And where you identify somebody who is a supplier who cannot be found anywhere else, they're a sole supplier of critical interest, then that makes it to the risk register. And guess who? Top management, the senior leadership, must take accountability for any problems which stem from that sole supplier. So ISO forces you to ask the right questions in the right way to the right people.
And I guess if those suppliers have come back and say, yeah, we've got ISO 27001 and it's full scope, let's have a quick chat about what full scope means as well, shall we? Because we don't just want one laptop, do we? We're looking for full scope of an organisation when it comes to ISO 27000 or actually any standard.
Well, for any standard, you can choose your scope area. So some businesses, out of necessity, choose, for example, to cover their corporate IT structure by a particular certificate, usually information security. If you think about a car manufacturer, I'm not going to name names, but they might not need every manufacturing process covered by information security. However, the IT structure, which is part of that process, yeah, that does need to be covered by information security certificates. So when you're asking questions of your supply base and they say, I've got 27001, but it's only for example, the finance department, then that tells you nothing about how the rest of the business works. So you need to check the scope of that certificate as well as just, you know, taking the details which are held on that certificate. So an interesting question. But again, if you've got an ISO system in mind, those questions are forced because of the system you've implemented. So you'll always understand the risk.
And you can do that, Barry, can't you, by actually just asking for a copy of the certificate. Anybody that's got ISO certification should be very happy to share their certificate with you. Absolutely.
And again, go back to a question you've raised before about the hierarchy of accreditation in the globe, the IAF, followed by national accreditation bodies. If that certificate you're provided follows that scheme, then you could rest assured that they've been audited in a consistent way to everybody else across the world. You know, they've got their certificate, they're subject to scrutiny and some difficult questions, and then therefore, yes, they should be singing from the rooftops about the certificates they've got, because it proves and demonstrates their stance on whichever topic you're looking to address. So yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Conscious though, like I said before, that there are some businesses who make a significant profit just by printing certificates without any kind of scrutinization from an accreditation body. So if you encounter one of those certificates, then I would not take it at face value.
And Trevor, from the world of insurance, what's your perspective on evidencing how risk is being managed and whether companies, would you ask for a copy of an ISO certificate?
To be perfectly honest, it's not something I asked for. We asked for whether they are accredited. We don't actually ask for a view of the certificate, although I do know that from a insurer point of view, they ask about things like fire risk assessments, all of those sort of areas. You've got obviously health and safety policy, you've got all of these. It's more to do with insurers being behind the times, I think, rather than anything else, and not asking that question, because they certainly want to know about whether you've got one, but they don't actually ask for us to show them a certificate, which is something that they don't do, so therefore we don't as a broker. Yeah, I mean, you can see the value of it, and especially like Barry just said, it's identifying that they are legit, really, isn't it? It's come from a legit source, that it is what it says on the tin, you know, and that the right standards are in place. And it's reassuring to any insurer, as I said before, that if an ISO standard of whatever type is in there, it's a reassurance to that company that's a well ran or managed risk.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Sue, any questions before we carry on?
Yes, there is. So if risk management is going to be integrated wholly into a management system at all levels, how do we ensure this happens?
So we almost encountered that by proxy, if you like, when we talked about top management and leadership. So we can for example, the production team can implement a risk management which is specific to the way production occurs. You know, what raw materials do we need, what do we do with those materials, and what are we expected to spit out at the other end, and what are the risks around that process. But that means nothing if top management are unaware of what risks are prevalent in the production team. So top management is key to everything, because the risks which need to be fed to executives or the board level in order to make decisions about controlling risk, which supplier to use, what happens if the worst comes around, the top management must have their fingerprints on everything to make it viable undertaking. So you can, anybody anywhere in any department can implement a risk management process, but if it's not understood across the business because top management haven't driven that, then it's a hiding to nothing, I'm afraid. So yeah, the leadership is everything in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, it's also about talking to the stakeholders, isn't it? So it's no good just talking to, for my instance, I can talk to a lot of financial controllers and financial directors, but they won't know what's happening on the production floor. You know, they're looking at finances, you know. So, you know, I actually want to go and talk to the health and safety guy. I want to go and talk to the production guy, because they're the ones who will tell me the truth about what's happening in their area. And when you get to a sizable business, you know, you've got production here, finance there, you know, they're all over the shop. They're not even in the same building. So how can you expect one building to know what the other building's doing? So it certainly shows you that, you know, by having an ISO standard in place where it's being well managed, you'll get that sense that everything's happening in the right areas, and you'll know what that structure is and who you have to talk to.
Brilliant. So another question.
Yeah, another question is, what does the panel think of the challenges of supply chain risk management?
It's a really good question, really good question. And what I would say is, let's have a look at where things go wrong. So, and that'll bring, you know, I'm not going to answer the question directly, but I'll give you a scenario. The US government was part of a supply chain attack. So a national, yet to be confirmed, yet to be identified, and a nation not too far from where I'm sat, was responsible for breaking into the framework of one of the US government suppliers. And the US government didn't, by its own admission, conduct the kind of due diligence necessary for such a critical supplier, and some of their records from nuclear defense, civil aviation, to name but a few, were exposed as a result of a cyber attack against the US government supply chain. So and think about the resources the US government have got, and they didn't do it right, and it went wrong, and records were leaked, and there was a real national security risk as a result. So if it can happen to them with all of the resources at their disposal, it can happen to anybody. So it's not a one and done thing. It isn't something you can absolutely say with 100% confidence, you've got a grip of this. You know, I'm absolutely 100% certain there are no risks associated with my suppliers, or I know what every single one of those risks are. The ISO implementation scheme will make you revisit and reevaluate the risks you do know periodically, which is all you can fundamentally do.
And just adding on to that as well, Sue, I would encourage everybody to look beyond their finance spend as well. So the supplier that could cause you the most harm to your business is not necessarily the one that you spend the most money with. So be very, very cognizant of what key steps are in your process when you're assessing supply chain risk. That would be that for me is another key aspect. And then certainly the ISOs encourage you to look at risk-based approach to supplier management. So as an example, for example, you may not consider that cleaning of your building is particularly high risk. But actually, if you're a hospital or medical facility, cleaning of your business is mega high risk. So you've got to think about the context in which those suppliers operate. And that for me is absolutely key as well.
Yeah, so the point I was making there was a human element of where does physical access get granted, and everybody was concerned about contractors and engineers and people who tamper with kit and equipment and electricity, and nobody was looking at the cleaner. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. That's the questions for the moment. Thanks.
Trevor, anything from your perspective, just listening to that discussion there around leadership and supply chain management?
Well, yeah, and well, not much more, to be honest. I kind of said how I feel about it. I mean, supply chain management, I understand that in the US, one of the big retailers was bought down by an air conditioning company that was part of their supply chain, which resulted in a massive claim. And I've seen it at the smaller end as well. You know, it's the simplest of things that, you know, who supplies your telecoms, you know, that can cause you a problem, you know, and, you know, that's where you're exposed. So it's about acknowledging that and dealing with that and, you know, preempting it and having a plan of action and a framework to work to in order to make sure that you can bounce back from it if it happens. So
that brings us nicely onto resilience, isn't it? It's that what happens if something goes wrong planning. And I know that's part of ISO 27001. It's a significant part of ISO 22301, which is the business continuity standard. Barry, what do you want to add in terms of that resilience planning? And I think the rehearsal around resilience planning is really important as well, isn't it?
Yes, there's a plan in isolation that nobody knows about and is practiced is not a plan at all. It's a document and a hiding is nothing. So yes, it is a part of 27001 in ensuring that you know what information and equipment you may need in terms of what happens in response to an incident and when resilience is needed. It's also a standard in its own right. So for all operations and all parts of the business, you prioritize, risk manage, and determine what it is you need to recover from, and then practice recovering from it. And so the ISO standards give you the facility to do that. Just my take on it, I can see the future sometimes, and I can see business continuity and operational resilience being a part of every standard at some point in the future, whether it's near future or distant future, at some point during the revision of all of those standards, which were listed earlier in the slide deck. Being able to demonstrate resilience and operational continuity is going to become important, just as important to enter a supply chain as it is for information security at the moment, you know, and we will see that absolutely. And COVID has forced the world to look at that in terms of the number of businesses which weren't able to effectively respond versus those that did. And then, okay, so let's not get to a point where we're responsive, to go back to a thing Trevor said right at the beginning. Let's preempt what could occur and practice responding to that. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be a tabletop exercise with 2 or 3 people who make the decisions, and then yeah, you can have fun with it. Take the decision makers out, bring the next level down in, and say, right, now what happens? And so yeah, the ISO does in some standards force you to address the topic of business continuity, but all businesses should be looking at that. What do we need to survive, and what is the worst thing that can happen to us, and then scale back. What's more likely to happen to us, and start practicing responding to those events. And soon over time, you'll develop a well-sculpted plan, which will keep people like Trevor happy for one, and for two, it will help you to genuinely have muscle memory about what to do when things go wrong, and that's so important.
And Trevor, I know we were doing a business continuity test with one of our clients, and pretty much one of the very, very first things that they do if they have an incident is who's phoning the insurer. So at what point should insurers be called when something may be going wrong, or even as part of the test program? And I have to say that this guy took it so seriously. He actually did a test phone call to his insurer at 3 a.m. on a Friday morning just to see whether the insurer really was there 24/7. And he was, I have to add.
I mean, like I said before, I work a lot in the cyberspace, and one of the key things I say to people when they're looking at cyber insurance is it a 24/7 instant response number that you can call, or is it send me an email, hope they pick it up on Monday morning, by then you're dead type of service? So, you know, traditionally, most of these incidents, whether it's a fire, whether it's a cyber incident or anything like that, happen outside of the working hours, right? So you need to know that you can contact somebody, and that's key in these aspects. But the fact is if your property's on fire, you're not going to have that plan in front of you. So it's also about where you store it, how do you access it, and it's so important that you practice it. You know, the amount of insurers who say to somebody, do you have a business continuity plan? And people say yes, and you say, where is it? And they go, it's up here in my head. You know, the trouble is unfortunately, if you're the person that's just been clunked over the head because you've had an accident at work, it's no good, you know. So it's about getting it down in a formalized way, putting it on paper and making sure that you know what you're going to do next, and you practice that to make sure it works. And if anything changes within your business, you review, re-practice, do it again. And if you're doing that, the other thing that some people get mixed up with is you've got business continuity on one side and you've got a disaster recovery plan on the other. They are two different things. If anybody thinks they're the same thing, they're wrong. And that's what we get told more often. Oh yeah, I've got a DRP, but I haven't gotten it, you know, and you're like, but that's the same anyway. No, it's not. They're two different things. So just, you know, if I say to anybody, you know, a business continuity plan is more important than you think at the time of need, because, you know, John down the pub's not going to help you.
John down the pub may be very, very clever, but he's obviously not. Brilliant. Okay, Sue, any other questions before we come to a close?
Yes, so has there been an uptake of the ISO 45003 guidelines by companies with ISO 45001 and those without ISO 45001?
I've certainly seen more interest in the UK in 45003, definitely. So for those who are not aware, 45003 is around the mental health aspects of health and safety, and is very, very important to overall health and safety, in my opinion. Yes, we see more companies get involved with it because it's not a standard you can actually certify against. We don't have as many numbers as we do for the actual certificates. Numbers of certificates that are issued for the likes of 9 and 45001 itself, but we've definitely seen a lot more interest in using the principles and practices that are recommended by 45003.
Thank you. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
So guys, we've got 5 minutes until we get to the top of the hour. Top tip, just one top tip, what would you recommend to everybody on this call that they should do when they're thinking about ISO or risk management or insurance? Trevor, I think I'll put you on the spot first of all.
Put me on the spot first of all. Think about your activities and what are involved in it. Make sure that people you're working with, or rather insurers, understand exactly what your business is doing, and get yourself a business continuity plan, whether that's through the ISO, will give you the good framework for it.
Okay, thank you. Barry?
I would just encourage it. Don't wait for something to happen and then respond to it. You know, I think that was the first point Trevor made, and certainly something I want to reinforce is if you're responding to something, it's already too late. You could probably take steps today to make sure that an event and the quality, health, safety, environmental, information security, data privacy, whatever the topic is, if you're worried about it, ISO can help, and the sooner you get cracking in implementing something, the better.
Brilliant. Guys, it's been absolutely fantastic. Lots of advice shared there. And I know we went through this in a rapid time in an hour. Sue, I'm going to hand back to you now to close.
Oh, thank you ever so much. And thanks for such an interesting and informative session. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, and thanks particularly to our panel for sharing their knowledge with us, and thanks to everybody that's joined us, and thanks too for the questions. Some really interesting questions there. Hope we've answered them all. I can't see any more coming through, so I think we have. The recording will be on the IIRSM Resource Hub later today, so you'll be able to catch up or recap anything in your own time. So I think we'll leave the webinar here. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope to see you all again soon at another IIRSM webinar. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.